The morning light spilled across the manicured lawns of Maple Ridge, the kind of neighborhood where every house looked like a magazine cover. White fences, trimmed hedges, and driveways lined with cars worth more than most people's homes. To anyone passing by, the Reynolds residence looked perfect, a modern two-story house with glass walls and a garden full of roses. Inside, Emily Reynolds stood at the kitchen island, slicing fruit for breakfast. Her movements were slow, careful, rehearsed. She was 7 months pregnant, wearing a loose blue dress that hid more than her belly. She hummed softly under her breath, but her voice trembled. Her husband, Grant Reynolds, walked in from the hallway, tall, perfectly pressed in his suit, a man used to being admired. As CEO of a fast-growing financial firm, Grant was on the cover of local business magazines, praised for his visionary leadership. To the world, he was the picture of success. To Emily, he was a man who smiled in public and destroyed everything behind closed doors. "You're late with breakfast again," he said, glancing at his watch without looking at her. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't sleep much." Grant poured his coffee, shaking his head. "You know, Emily, this constant fatigue of yours, it's starting to look like laziness. Maybe you shouldn't have taken maternity leave so early." She said nothing. The safest response was no response. As he turned to leave, he noticed the cut near her wrist, still faintly red. He frowned. "What's that?" "I burned myself with the pan," she said quickly. He stared for a moment, then smiled, that cold, polished smile he used in board meetings. "You should be more careful." When the door shut behind him, Emily's shoulders collapsed. She sank into a chair, pressing a hand over her stomach. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she whispered to the baby. "Just a few more weeks, and we'll be far from here. I promise." But promises were fragile things in the Reynolds home. Across town, a small diner called Bessie's Stop was coming to life. The place was known for its old jukebox, trucker coffee, and the line of motorcycles that often parked out front on weekends. That morning, the sound of laughter filled the corner booth where a group of bikers sat. They weren't what people expected. Most were in their 40s or 50s, rough around the edges, but with the steady calm of people who'd lived hard and learned to grow from it. Their club, the Iron Compass, wasn't about crime or rebellion. They rode to raise money for veterans and families in trouble. Their leader, Caleb Dean, leaned back in the booth, stirring his coffee. He had a weathered face, salt and pepper beard, and the kind of eyes that seemed to notice everything. "You think folks like us ever really fit in places like this?" one of the younger riders asked, nodding toward the families eating nearby. Caleb shrugged. "Don't need to fit in. Just need to show up when it counts." As if on cue, the bell over the diner door jingled. A young man in a delivery uniform rushed in, pale and shaking. "Hey, someone's gotta help. There's screaming coming from that big house up on Ridge Lane." The table went quiet. "Ridge Lane?" Caleb asked. "The fancy neighborhood?" "Yeah," the kid said. "The one with all the cameras and gates. I was dropping off groceries. The lady there, she looked terrified. And her husband, he slammed the door in my face." The room fell still. No one said it, but everyone knew whose house that was. Grant Reynolds, billionaire, investor, local power broker. Caleb set his mug down. "You call the cops." "They told me to stay out of it," the kid said. "Said it's a private matter." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yeah. That's what they always say." Within minutes, the Iron Compass crew was back on the road. 6 bikes, steady and loud, cutting through the suburban quiet like a warning bell. Back at the Reynolds home, Emily had made her mistake. She tried to leave. The packed duffel bag was in the nursery, hidden behind the crib. She waited for Grant's car to disappear down the street before slipping upstairs to grab it. But he'd come back. He'd forgotten his briefcase. When he saw the half-open closet door, the bag on the floor, something in him snapped. "So that's what you've been planning," he said, voice chillingly calm. "Run away. Take my child. Destroy my reputation." She backed up, words tumbling out in panic. "Grant, please." He grabbed her arm, the force making her stumble. The bag fell to the floor. "You think you can embarrass me? You think you can just leave?" Her hand flew protectively to her stomach. "Please, not the baby." His eyes were wild now, not angry, but desperate to control, to crush. He raised his hand. That's when the rumble came, not thunder this time, but the low vibration of engines rolling to a stop outside. Grant froze. "What is that noise?" Emily turned toward the sound, confusion and faint hope flickering across her face. Through the glass front door, 6 figures appeared, their bikes lined neatly by the curb. Caleb stepped forward, his jacket soaked with sweat and sun, not rain. He rang the bell once. Grant's face twisted. "Who are these people?" When the bell rang again, louder, he hissed, "Stay here," and stormed toward the door. Emily watched from the hall, clutching the wall for balance. She could hear voices, low, calm, but firm. Then Caleb's voice carried through, "Sir, we heard a woman screaming. You want to tell us she's all right, or do we need to find out ourselves?" For the first time in a long time, Grant Reynolds hesitated. His power, the one that silenced everyone else, didn't seem to work on men like these. Emily stepped into the hallway, breathing unevenly. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment she'd been waiting for. Grant didn't open the door right away. He just stood there, one hand on the knob, staring through the frosted glass at the figures outside. The rumble of their engines had gone quiet, but the air still vibrated with something heavier, an unspoken warning. Emily watched from the hallway, one hand pressed against her belly. She wanted to scream for help, but fear kept her silent. For years, every attempt to speak up had ended in pain or shame. But these men outside, whoever they were, made her heart race for a different reason. They didn't sound like anyone who bowed to Grant. Caleb rang the bell again, this time longer. "Sir, we don't mean trouble," he said, his voice calm and deep. "We just want to make sure everyone's safe." Grant finally pulled open the door. His smile came instantly, the kind of polished grin he used at fundraisers. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly, "there's been some mistake. Everything's fine here." Caleb studied him for a moment, then glanced past his shoulder. "Mind if I hear that from her?" Grant's jaw twitched. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Caleb said. "If there's a woman inside, I'd like to hear from her that everything's all right." The tension between them was thick, and for a second, neither moved. Then Emily stepped into view, standing behind Grant, her eyes wide and wet. Caleb met her gaze, reading everything she couldn't say out loud, the bruises, the fear, the quiet plea for help. He took a slow breath. "Ma'am? You okay?" Grant turned toward her, voice sharp. "Tell them to leave." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Caleb took a step forward. "You sure you want to speak for her, pal?" "Get off my property," Grant said, his tone no longer polite. Caleb didn't budge. "You can call it your property," he said, "but it ain't your kingdom. Not when someone's hurting inside it." Grant's hand clenched at his side. "You people think you can barge in here and—" One of the bikers behind Caleb, a big man named Logan, interrupted quietly, "Boss, she looks like she's about to faint." Caleb's eyes flicked to Emily again. Her knees were shaking, her breath shallow. "Ma'am," he said gently, "do you want us to leave?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Grant's glare bore into her, the silent command as loud as a shout. But something inside Emily broke, not in weakness, but in refusal. She shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. Grant spun toward her, disbelief twisting his features. What did you just say? Her voice came again, stronger this time. Don't leave. That was all Caleb needed. He stepped inside, his boots silent on the polished floor. The other bikers stayed near the doorway, blocking any escape Grant might have thought about. Sir, Caleb said quietly, you need to back up. Grant's mask cracked. You don't know who you're dealing with. Yeah, Caleb replied. I've heard that line before. Usually from men who think money makes them untouchable. Grant lunged forward, shoving him, but Caleb barely moved. He just caught Grant's wrist and pushed it down, not violently, just firmly, the way you'd stop a child from hurting himself. Don't, Caleb warned, voice low. Emily started to cry then, not out of pain, but from the shock of someone finally standing between her and the man she feared. Kara, the only woman in the group, moved to Emily's side, steadying her by the arm. Easy now. We've got you, she said softly. Grant tried again to move forward, shouting, you can't take her. She's my wife. Caleb turned his head, meeting his eyes with steady calm. She's a person. Not property. Remember that. The words hung in the air. Outside, a few curious neighbors had started peeking from behind their blinds, drawn by the sight of motorcycles in the quiet suburb. Kara led Emily toward the door. We'll get you to a doctor, she said. Grant's voice shook with rage. You'll regret this. Every single one of you. Caleb paused at the doorway, glancing back. You've already lost the only thing that mattered, he said quietly. When they stepped outside, the sun had begun to drop behind the hills, painting the sky in orange and gold. It looked too beautiful for what had just happened inside that house. The bikers surrounded Emily protectively as she was helped into the back of a truck. Her hands trembled, but she held on to Kara's jacket sleeve like a lifeline. As they pulled away, Caleb looked back at the house in the rearview mirror. Grant stood at the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, his expression burning with fury. He's calling someone, Logan said. Let him, Caleb replied. We've done the right thing. But Caleb knew better. Men like Grant didn't surrender quietly. By the time they reached the small-town clinic 20 miles out, Emily was pale and exhausted. The doctor on duty, an older woman named Dr. Keller, examined her quickly. She's dehydrated, blood pressure's high, but the baby's strong, she said. She needs rest. And distance from whatever she's been through. Caleb stayed in the hallway, staring out the window. He'd seen a lot in his life, accidents, fights, the kind of pain that leaves scars, but there was something different about this. This was evil wrapped in respectability. Kara came out quietly. She's stable, she said. She asked for you. When Caleb stepped into the room, Emily tried to sit up. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. He shook his head. You don't owe me a thing. Tears slid down her cheeks. No one ever came before. Not once. Caleb's voice softened. Then that ends today. She nodded, closing her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. For a long time, Caleb stood there, watching her breathe. He didn't know what would come next, lawyers, police, threats, but he knew one thing for sure, walking away wasn't an option anymore. Back at the Reynolds estate, Grant stood by the window, staring out over his perfect lawn. The police had come and gone, their visit brief. His lawyers had already begun making calls. He smiled faintly, bitterly. You think you can take my life apart, he muttered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. But what he didn't realize was that the world outside his wealth was bigger, louder, and far less afraid of him than he'd ever believed. And somewhere down that open highway, a line of bikers rode under the fading sky, their engines carrying the quiet promise that men like Grant Reynolds would never go unchallenged again.